Instead of just being like, oh, look, this thing, I think I can maybe use this thing to help myself and manage better, it ends up becoming like, personality overhaul, identity overhaul. And, suddenly it's 10 years later and you're a Reiki master and you're working in a crystal shop in like Glastonbury or Sedona or something like that. And you're in the long flowy dress and you're the top recruiter for an essential oils cult.
I have given him what he always wanted.
All my life feeling from something.
Are you saying this is a dream?
There's something about trauma that makes you question the larger things in life. And, for that reason, a lot of people that go through really tough things in their life end up more spiritual in one way or another. I've seen this especially in like new age circles, but I think it's true across all kinds of like religion and anything that like gives you a larger sense of meaning. You're gonna find people involved in it who've been through some real shit in their lives, and I think because people are sort of vulnerable in that way, when they're involved in these things, that can make them more susceptible to cults and like destructive leaders and things like that, which is something that we've talked about a lot on this channel. But over this last decade of experience I've had with this, I've come to think that there really is a reason that healing is talked about so much in these circles. So many people who are interested in spirituality, it's like they're in some sort of long-term or chronic pain, and spirituality becomes a way to soothe that. It was definitely the case for me that I got respite from it. But I think oftentimes, without ever really meaning to, people get sucked into this kind of thing. You just get sucked up into it and it becomes your whole world, Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's very understandable that people, myself included, would end up getting involved in or even being more open to a more spiritual perspective after having been through something that makes you question yourself or the bigger things in life. But one thing that does happen so often is that people are struggling with like genuine real struggles and they end up tumbling down a rabbit hole in a way. Like it's like you go there for answers, and before long the real reason, like the main reason you were there in the first place, falls by the wayside. And you have this whole personality overhaul, and then you come out like fucking Walmart Jesus, And, if you think I'm throwing stones, rest assured this is a glass house. I think what does happen when people get sucked up into this is, the very real desire to overcome trauma, to deal with the pain that you've arrived at this thing in the first place for, ends up getting co-opted by like 101 spiritual concepts and ideas, and then the reason that you were there in the first place, the reason you picked up that book or went to that shop or went to that healing or whatever in the first place, falls by the wayside, and it becomes like a bandage instead of actually something genuinely properly therapeutic. So in the end, it becomes like a pacifying thing rather than something that's driving like genuine, real, honest, rigorous self-discovery and like honesty and moments of learning and moments of growth and like seeing things from another point of view and like actual fucking healing. People find their way to this stuff, and instead of just being like, oh, look, this thing, I think I can maybe use this thing to help myself and manage better, it ends up becoming like personality overhaul, identity overhaul. And these things that are supposed to elevate your life and make it better and improve the life you already had end up taking it over and almost replacing it with some weird sort of ideologically laden other life, And, suddenly it's 10 years later and you're a Reiki master and you're working in a crystal shop in fucking like Glastonbury or Sedona or something like that. And you're in the long flowy dress and you're the top recruiter for an essential oils cult. I think in these situations, it's important to take stock, like to just stop a minute and like ask yourself, where was I when I came to this in the first place? Like, why did I come to this? What was the reason for this in the first place? Where was I when I broke up with my abusive partner like 10 years ago or whatever? And I picked, hopefully not 10 years ago. Hopefully this video catches you a bit earlier than that if you're a person that's going through this, But where was I, when I broke up with that partner and I walked into that crystal shop or, went for that energy healing or picked up that book, Did I get here because this is where I set out to get to? Like, did I intend to get to here when I first picked up that book or whatever? Or is this the consequence of like a long laundry list of promises and hopes and claims that in the end weren't actually delivered on? I think, having gone through a healing process of, recovering from some kind of serious trauma, spiritual beliefs shouldn't overtake the original purpose for picking up that book, seeing that healer, or whatever it is. Because if you're not careful, you can go into a healing and, come away with a whole other worldview, a whole other belief system. That said, I do think to heal from things, to grow, you do have to change how you see things sometimes. You do have to be open to another point of view. But to change your whole worldview because of a bad relationship or whatever it was that you went through, to me, it's a bit like bombing a molehill because a mole looked at you funny. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's shit. And, I don't want to downplay abusive relationships and it's not a one-to-one, you can't say a bad relationship is the same as a mole looking at you funny. Okay, but stick with me on the metaphor, because maybe there's a way to turf the mole out without destroying half of Sussex. Just putting it out there. Maybe there's a middle ground here. Maybe bombing the molehill is overkill. In my life, when I was struggling and then I suddenly had this new belief system, I suddenly had this new framework for how everything worked, and this whole the world I lived in was now a different one, right? That helped me for a while. It helped me cope for a bit. But it changed me. I ended up getting consumed by it, and I ended up straying from who I actually am. So in the end, rather than actually helping me in the long run, it became like a dysfunctional coping mechanism. Now, I can see it happening where, you go to an energy healer or something and they say oh, you've got a problem with your sacral chakra because your ex's new girlfriend has cursed you or something. So what you need to do is you need to, sit in the moonlight and chant Saranad a bunch of times, and then sleep with an obsidian crystal under your pillow, or do X cleansing or whatever. They might be right about the tension in your gut. They might be right about any number of things that they said, and it's even possible that you may benefit from doing this moonlight Saranad thing, or sleeping with this crystal under your pillow or whatever. They may not be right though for the reasons that they think they are. And so taking on all of their reasoning as well as doing the thing they're suggesting may be a bit too much, especially if you're in a period of crisis, That said, letting things wash over you sometimes and just taking them for what they are, as long as you're safe, safety first, that can be all right. I think for instance, some people find the chakra system like a useful way to imagine emotions and how they feel in the body. Can be a useful thing. It's not for me these days, admittedly, but whatever the case, I think it's probably a good idea to hold off on overhauling your entire worldview until you're in a sort of fit state mentally and emotionally to pass through things and explore things in a way that you're able to make decisions a little bit more lucidly. That way, I think it's less likely to become like a crutch or, a way to avoid or rationalize your pain and imagine actually maybe it's a good thing for one reason or another, because, that does happen sometimes. And in the end up defeating the object that the whole thing was for in the first place, which was actually to recover from this thing. I think with spirituality, there are some practices which can, if done right and with the right degree of psychoeducation, potentially yield the same results as therapy sessions, for instance. Maybe not as reliably or consistently, but I have seen it happen, And I think in a lot of ways, occult practices and religion, and don't tell the Christians I said that, they will hate that I've put those two together as equally good for the same thing. But I think in a lot of ways, occult practices and religion can kind of be like a poor man's therapy at times. It's certainly not an adequate replacement for, genuine evidence-based therapy across the board, but at times when it's all that's available to you, historically that's what religion has been in a lot of cases, as well as many other things, but you catch my drift. That said, I do think psychoeducation and self-knowledge and a willingness to be honest with yourself, even if it hurts a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit sometimes, I think that's really crucial. But spiritual escapism, on the other hand, isn't healing, is it? it's just avoidance with flowery language and a bad attitude, right? So, it's no surprise to me that there is an emphasis on healing in these circles, but I think it's super important to pay attention to and really like hammer out in your own head the distinction between healing from trauma, like actually healing from trauma, and what your spiritual beliefs are. And there may be an overlap, but there will be points where they're not overlapped. And I think being clear on that in our own heads is super important. I do believe that spirituality can be a part of a healthy life, but I think that when your spiritual beliefs start to replace like a genuine, grounded and, down to earth and honest approach, attitude towards life, then you've got quite a potentially unstable structure there, I think. I think when the foundations are shaky, spirituality can begin to overcompensate, and it can begin to sort of draw you away from actually dealing with your problems and even become an excuse not to look at those things. And, I speak from experience when I say it can become something that you become so absorbed in that you stray from yourself. You stop being yourself a little bit. You just get lost in this thing and completely absorbed in it. And your life doesn't get better for that quite often, unless you go off in some sort of like wanderlust tea days, and
This is a dream?
But, that might not always be for the best. And I think sometimes when you do get absorbed in these things, you can end up not knowing yourself anymore. And in that state, I think it becomes harder and harder to connect with yourself, because you've got all these ideas and these beliefs about how certain things should be done, right? And sometimes even that it's a good idea, that it's virtuous or necessary to actually avoid your problems or enable those problems in one way or another. And then this whole thing that's supposed to help you recover ends up doing the opposite. And I've talked about that in a previous video where I was looking at Stephen West's take on the idea that any value almost always, when it's taken to the extreme, begins to undermine itself. But for me, what I've found is that spirituality being like a healthy part of like an integrated life for me, rather than like a dysfunctional coping mechanism, is how honest I'm prepared to be with myself and how sort of brave I'm prepared to be, or I can find it in myself to be, in that honesty. And also whether you're able to have like that metacognition, that sort of wise mind in your head that allows you to recognize and sort of check in on your spirituality and check whether it is getting a bit too big for its boots and is at risk of taking over and spilling out all over the other areas of your life, In the end, I think it comes down to this. Be wary of looking for an answer and ending up with a whole belief system, because while you might need to accept a few hard truths to grow, even in difficult times, maybe, just maybe, and I'm just throwing this out there, maybe a literal crisis isn't the best time to overhaul your entire worldview with Wendy from the local crystal shop. If Wendy's right, she'll still be right when you're feeling better, right? Maybe for the reasons she thinks she is, maybe not. Who knows? Such is life. At the end of the day, wherever your pain and your healing from it takes you, seatbelt first, make sure you got your seatbelt on first, safety first. And then after that, if you're about to make some big change, some big overhaul in your life, make sure that you're choosing to do that. Make sure that the choice to do that is yours, because it's your mind, it's your house. Don't be letting strays in the cat flap and then wondering why you've run out of cat food and your sofa smells like cat piss. It's your mind, and if you don't think for yourself, someone else will do it for you. Usually when I upload a video like this, there's stuff I can't say in the video, be it due to time constraints or because YouTube doesn't like you talking about certain things on the platform. So most weeks, whenever I upload a video here on the channel, I also upload some audio content over on Patreon. Right now there's over like 30 audio companions that are exclusive to Patreon right now. Stuff on like rational eclecticism and safe spirituality and other stuff, including stuff that you won't hear me talk about on the channel. £2 a month will get you access to that, but you can always contribute more if my work is worth more to you. I'm Andy Fellows. Please be kind and ask good questions, and I'll see you in the next one.